Did you remember to lock the doors?
A little detail first. I live in the Ozark Mountains. I have about 63 acres of land on a mountain, and I'm about 20 minutes from both towns near me. My house was originally a cabin built in the 1800s that someone had built onto. I don't have much more knowledge of the house because all the paperwork burned in a courthouse fire. Weird shit has always happened in and around the house, but those are stories for a different time. Last year, around February, I had a huge argument with my husband and decided to go hike up in the mountain to cool off. My husband went to work on his Jeep, and my 5 dogs and I went up the mountain. Normally my dogs run around through the trees, but they always keep me in their sights. This time, they stuck very close to me. I noted it, and just assumed it was because they knew how upset I was. We made it to the clearing, and it just seemed so still up there. I felt a little uneasy, but ignored it and climbed up our deer stand. I sat up there for about 20 minutes, took some pictures, and I looked down to see my dogs at the base of the tree, standing in different directions in alert stances. The feeling of dread washed over me. I scrambled down the deer stand and walked across the clearing with the dogs in tow. I did not want to run because we have predators. All of a sudden, I could hear loud whistling. I stopped in my tracks. My dogs are now on high alert and all staring behind me to the left. My husband's voice came from that direction. He was screaming my name like something was wrong. I cannot describe the fear that came over me. I continued to walk down the mountain and walked over to my husband and asked him what was wrong. He looked at me confused and told me he had no idea what I was talking about. I kind of forgot about this moment until today. I woke up to a loud whistling outside of my house, around 4:40 to 5 a.m. It was the same whistle I used to call my dogs home. Parts of the whistle were wrong. All of my dogs were inside and my husband was still asleep. Part of me told myself to go check it out, but a voice in my head said to stay in bed. I listened to the voice. Update. We are okay. These past days have been quiet. Our 2 male dogs have refused to go inside except to eat. They've been guarding the house. This happened to me late August when I was driving down from Washington to San Diego with some friends. The 3 of us were camping in cool spots along the way, and at one point during our trip, we stopped to camp for a night near the Sierra Nevada mountains. My friend had heard that the sunrise's reflection over the mountains is beautiful, so we decided to wake up around 5 a.m. the next morning to watch. That time came and we reluctantly left our tent and walked about 10 minutes from our pretty remote campsite over to a long road and stretch of desert with a great view of the mountains. We stood there for about 20 minutes. Then, as I was looking across the distance, something caught my eye. It seemed to be some type of animal, but a weird size and super white. At first, I thought it was a bunny, but then decided that there was no way, as it was way too large for that. The figure was maybe the size of a large dog, bright white, and moved in kind of an unnatural way, like jerky and fast. I remember the face being really weird, kind of indescribable. It gave me goosebumps as I stared at it, trying to figure out what I was seeing. I looked over to my friends and asked them if they were seeing the thing that I had described. When I looked back, I couldn't see it anymore. Neither of my friends had seen this figure, but they shared a look, and one of them did a motion like 2 fingers walking on his arm. The other nodded and they told me they didn't know what it was, but we should go back to our campsite. After that experience, I asked them what they weren't telling me a bunch of times. I kind of thought they were playing a joke on me, but I was still persistent with my questions. They told me to drop it until we made it to San Diego and promised they would explain it when we got there. A few days later, as we drove into San Diego late at night, I brought it up again. That's when I learned about the skinwalker for the first time. They told me that they've read stories that sound exactly like what I saw, and noted how weird it was that I described the figure like that without ever having heard of the skinwalker before. I was so freaked out, and I was glad they waited to tell me. They told me that they waited to share because they didn't want to risk anything by thinking or talking about it. I'm not sure if I saw the skinwalker that day, or if maybe my tired eyes were playing tricks on me. I'm just definitely not eager to return to the area anytime soon. So, I was chilling at home and my other friends were out hiking. I wasn't invited because I had college courses that day, but when they came back, they recited an experience to me. So my friends, including my best friend Brandon, were hiking around the Cherokee National Park, and before they knew it, the sun had set. Brandon was trying to get down to a second part of their trail faster, and he slid down the side of a hill. Little did he know his pocket ripped, and his phone fell out of his pocket. He didn't know until about 15 minutes later when he went to text somebody and didn't find it. They were already back where they were at this point, but they used SnapMap to see where his phone was. He ran back to get it and picked it up. He placed it securely in an unripped pocket until he heard a blood-curdling scream. He's had similar experiences, but not this close. At first, he thought it was a mountain lion, until they distinctly yelled, "Help! Over here!" He walked up the incline and looked between the trees to see where the sound was coming from. And across the way, he saw a man standing on a neighboring mountain. The screams stopped, and he just stared over at Brandon, an unmoving silhouette. This continued for a few seconds before Brandon's fight or flight suddenly kicked in, and he went with it and just started running as fast as he could back to the meeting grounds. He looked back once and recited to me that the eyes of whatever was chasing him were reflective and too big to be a mountain lion of sorts. He ran for about 8 minutes, and then he ran into 2 other friends that were on the trip, Caleb and Alex, and they were like, "Dude, what's wrong?" Brandon wastes no time explaining and just tells them, "Just fucking run." And so they did. They ran for another 10 minutes. All the while, the 3 of them exclaimed that they kept hearing screams, all in different tones of voices, male, female, etc. They finally got back, still feeling the chasing, and urged everybody to just get in the car. After that, they sped off and didn't look back. They still haven't gone back. To me, this sounds like a skinwalker encounter, but what do you all think? Because I know since they're Navajo creatures, they mostly reside in the Midwest areas. But I just don't know what else this could have been. We're in East Tennessee. I live the furthest out from all my friends, 25 minutes from the nearest town, and walking distance from the Cherokee Park border. I was responding to a call in the middle of the Mojave Desert around 10 p.m. on a lonely road that leads to Pahrump, Nevada. As I was driving, I see to my left a human-like figure running through the desert. The man-shaped creature was all black and appeared to be running like 30 miles per hour. I turned on my lights and pointed in that direction, but it vanished. I freaked out a bit, called my girl, and told myself I'm new to the area. I'm probably just afraid and tripping out. I handled my call and forget it happened. 2 weeks later, I responded to a call with my partner, who was driving his own patrol car. My partner arrested a guy in a car, so I waited with the suspect car until the tow truck driver arrived. I sat in my car in the darkness, no biggie. I see the tow truck driver in the distance, headed my way. As he arrives, the tow driver immediately comes to my car and says, "Are you alright?" I say I'm fine, and he says, "I wanted to come check on you because I just saw a man running away from your car." I say, "Shut up, bro." He says, "Yeah, it looked like a tall man wearing all black running full speed away from your car." I tell him to get into my car and he and I go search for the guy, but don't see anything. At this point, I go back to the office and share my experience. They think I'm crazy. A few weeks go by. I'm on a call of a traffic collision with parties ejected. After clearing the scene, I walk back to my car. I hear some screams for help near my car. I start to yell, "Where are you?" and point my flashlight. I see nothing. A partner who is near me also hears them. We both go searching, but the screams stop. Never found anything. Everything I'm recounting in the story here is 100% true. I'm not going to try to persuade everyone that this is for certain a skinwalker or anything, but this creeped everyone involved in this story out, including me, a pretty big skeptic when it comes to this sort of thing. I'd also like to apologize for the length of this story in advance, as there's a lot that needs to be mentioned to set the scene. Here it goes. It all starts when a couple of friends and I, who I will refer to as Q, R, and S, wanted to have a guy's vacation and go camping somewhere back in May 2021. As a little backstory, Q was my best friend, and S was R's younger brother. We chose a spot that we had been to once before, but when we got there, we decided to drive out another 3-ish miles away from the previous destination. The area wasn't extremely in the middle of nowhere, as some of you might think. There was a dirt road wide enough for a decent-sized truck to go up and down the road with ease. Once we decided on a place to camp, we realized that not a soul was in the general area for probably another mile. The only evidence that there was anyone near us was the distant sound of gunshots, as the shooting was allowed in this area at the time. The only things alive in the area that we could see were larger than a bird, were the grazing cattle, caged in by a fence. One of the main activities we would be participating in was trapping coyotes. For those of you who don't know, coyotes don't require a tag to kill, and you can hunt as many as you want, as they are extremely quick to reproduce. We set up the traps about 500 yards away from our campsite in a valley that a creek was running through. We could tell that this was a bottleneck for the coyotes to travel through, as many game trails were coming down to this checkpoint, and we were certain at least one coyote would come through. We set up the traps and then headed back to our campsite. We got back and the sun is beginning to set. Being the middle of May, the sun was out in full force where we were at, approaching 100 degrees Fahrenheit. We were already exhausted from hauling around the heavy trapping gear, but this heat was just making it worse. It got to the point where the only thing we could do was sit in what little shade we had and wait for a couple of hours until the sun was down. A few hours later, the sun finally sets and the temperature begins to drop. We search around with our flashlights to find any dry sticks and dead sagebrush in the ground, all with the cows mooing in the background. Once we get our fire lit, we sit around and are laughing, reminiscing on old times, and just being happy to be around each other. A few minutes go by, and we're all just sitting around the campfire in silence when we hear a strange, high-pitched whine. I remember S asking R what the sound was, and R tells him it was probably a coyote or something. The sound keeps persisting, and whatever was making it was getting closer to the campfire. Every 10 or so seconds, the creature would call out. We went from laughing at it to just being confused the more we heard it, and the closer it got. Then, when we hear the thing call once again, probably around 40 feet or so in front of me, it's silent for only about 5 seconds this time. And not even kidding, we heard the same call, but this time from only like 20 feet behind me. This might not sound scary to a lot of you, but at that moment, it was chilling. We all scrambled up and we were feeling paranoid. So R assembles his .22 that he brought with us. Then out of nowhere, the creature is back to where it once was, about 40 or so feet in front of me again. We're all spooked and confused on how this is even happening. While Q, R, and S are talking, I pull out my phone, tell them to shut up, and try to record the sound that this thing is making. We all decide to try to follow that noise and see if we can find anything. It seemed to be leading us somewhere, but we weren't sure. As we followed, the thing was keeping a good distance between us, no less than 40 feet at a time. We crossed the cow fence, which was quite the task because it was coated in barbed wire. It's a bit strange too because that creature crossed through it without any sound. It kept pointing us in a direction that was leading to another creek. But as soon as we got there, we heard it from about 50 feet up a hill, which no animal could have done in that short of a time without making any noise. We got shaken up by the whole thing, so we just went back to our tent. As soon as we got up, however, Q pulled me aside and mentioned that he thought he saw something duck down when he shined his light at the hill the creature was leading us to. Throughout the night, we kept hearing that thing circling our tent, making those whining noises the entire time. We ended up spending another night there with the same things happening, but no harm came to us. The whole thing was just super unsettling. We didn't end up catching anything on that trip either. Now, before any of you ask, I'm going to clarify some things. This took place in southeastern Tooele County, Utah. The place we stayed was near a small town called Vernon. We're almost certain it wasn't a cow. Cows are loud, clumsy creatures. I mention this because none of us heard any movement, and even the baby cows can't move that high. At least, not from the ones that we heard. Also, how could it have crossed that fence? They had also gone around the hill to a different side of the owner's property. We were completely sober during the entire campout. None of us had even done drugs or drank. Maybe the heat exhaustion could have had a hand in it. We were able to find some coyote tracks, but we weren't sure if they were there before or after that night. Also, they were quite the distance away from our campsite, and they seemed to be going in completely the opposite direction from where the creature was taking us. So we ruled that out. I didn't record the descent into the valley because I got caught up in the moment. I wasn't thinking about much other than trying to figure out what that creature was. Also, my phone was very close to dying. It was most likely a coyote. That's what we thought at first, but coyotes don't sound like that. They also usually travel in packs and are extremely loud. They sound more like high-pitched dog barks. There is a chance it was a bird, but that's a theory that I'm trying to tell myself. It's just strange though, because no other birds were out that night. We are fairly certain it was just one creature, but the truth is we don't know for sure. But I am going to assume that there was just one because the sound never played at the same time from two different areas. Also, when we heard it from directly behind me, it never came from there again, only straight in front of me, leading us to that creek and beyond. I'm very skeptical it was some kind of a skinwalker, but I honestly have no clue anymore. I did a little research on the area we stayed a few months after the whole ordeal. The area we were camping at was old Goshute territory, before the Spaniards came back in the 1600s. I looked and there were hardly any Goshute legends that I could piece to something like this. I've been trying to do some research but haven't found anything like this. Does anyone have any ideas on what this could have been? A few months back, I was staying the night at my friend's house. He lives on the far edge of a town in Utah. He still had neighbors around, but there was a lot of forest around, and it was next to a canyon. I don't know if the scenery helps to the story, but I will try to list every detail of my encounter. I was staying the night, and my girlfriend also came over to hang out for a while. We hang out, and everything is fine and fun and great. 1 a.m. rolls around, and I had work at 6 a.m. in another town about 30 minutes away. So I said, hey, maybe you should leave so I can get some sleep before work. And at this time, my friend went to sleep, and it was just me and her. As we were walking to her car, I started feeling uneasy, like I could hear something. We get to the driver's side of her car, and I give her a hug goodbye. As I'm hugging my girlfriend, I look behind her and am struck with shock and fear as I see a creature maybe 8 to 9 feet tall. It was standing next to a cherry tree on the side of my friend's driveway. It was bipedal and very skinny. The moon was out, so I could see the creature clearly, but not so much the color details. The legs were bent backwards like a deer legs, or like the back moose legs. It slouched a lot, and I still couldn't see its face as it was in the leaves of the cherry tree, which has to be around 11 to 12 feet tall. I remember not being able to talk much except goodbye to my girlfriend. I don't know why, but I couldn't tell her to look behind her. Before I let go of her, though, I saw the creature move. It took off running towards the tree line. What absolutely baffled my mind was the speed of the creature. It looked impossible, as if it was blurry when it started running. I remember it looking right at me through the leaves, even though I couldn't see its face. What was the worst thing about the experience was the emotions attached to seeing what I saw. I felt like my confidence and emotions were attacked. I've never felt the feeling of fear like this before, and I have been charged by full-grown brown bears. After my girlfriend got into her car, I stood in that very spot from when I hugged her until she left the driveway. I don't know if it was more out of fear or just making sure she left safely. I didn't know what to do, so I slowly walked over to my car and got in. I called my friend multiple times, and he was asleep and didn't answer. I looked out my window after several minutes and looked to the left and saw my friend's cat, Avery. And I tried to think logically. If my friend's cat, which probably has better senses than me, is out here, then I am probably seeing things and it was safe. So I got out and stood next to Avery. Next thing I know, it sounds like there's a Clydesdale horse running through deep growth of the forest. Avery started running for the door, and I sprinted faster than Avery and got inside. For the next 3 hours, I sobbed and cried like I did when my dog died when I was 12. The fear I felt was indescribably powerful. I also remember it had long arms, and when it ran, it used all limbs. Please, someone tell me if this is a real creature. It gives me goosebumps to this day, thinking about it, talking about it, and just writing this brought me to tears. Just thinking about it is scary. I'm not that great of a storyteller, but I'll just quickly write what happened. We were staying at Hogan Airbnb on the Navajo Nation close to Monument Valley, and there were several very friendly, calm dogs roaming around. My friends and I, one of whom is deathly afraid of dogs, Had no problem being with them or petting them. We had a gorgeous view of Monument Valley right from our door, and it was cold yet cozy. That night I needed to use the bathroom and opened the door to the dogs going absolutely nuts. There is a difference between a dog barking at just whatever, a person walking by for example, and then there was this total fight or flight response. One of the dogs ran up to me, looking anxious and glancing into the desert behind the Hogan. It came close, then walked back to look into the desert behind the Hogan. Its fur stood up and it suddenly looked more like a wolf and took off into the desert at full speed, growling and barking at a huge shadow that ran away from the dog. There aren't many huge animals in the area. Some deer and horses, maybe cattle, but this was bigger. I didn't stick around long enough to check what it was. I was pretty shaken by what I saw. I found some fresh wolf or mountain lion prints and hoof prints, probably from a horse, outside the Hogan the next morning. The dog's prints are smaller. Our host said we might have seen a skinwalker. I'd like to believe it was a horse. It was dark anyhow, but the host didn't want to talk about it too much. The guides we met later on said the same thing and kept it at that. Later that day, one friend suddenly fell ill on a tour of another Hogan and almost fainted. That never happened before in her life. The guide said she probably had some bad spirits attached to her. She recovered quickly after stepping outside. That's all. It was a really wonderful trip overall. I'd go again if I could. Hello watchers and listeners, thank you so much for watching. As always, a big thank you to all of the Reddit users who kindly allowed me to use their stories. If you want to help support this channel, you will find links to both my Patreon and my Teespring store in the description below, so feel free to have a look. And the biggest thank you to all of you who continue to support me. I truly do appreciate it. And remember,
Papa loves you.